A poll came out recently, and it made the claim that young adults are more likely than older Catholics to accept all of the church's teaching. I thought that was intriguing, and I'll unpack that part of it in a moment here. However, there's another piece of this study that really stood out to me. The survey conducted by Real Clear Opinion Research and EWTN showed that there was actually an increase in confession among the younger Catholics. Here's what's fascinating. Those who frequent the Sacrament of Confession most are actually young Catholics age 18 to 34. In fact, 56% of them say they go at least one time per year. There's a stark contrast between those age 18 to 34, where we see 56% are going. That's almost 6 out of 10 Catholics age 18 to 34 who are actually going to confession. Well, on the other end of the spectrum, Catholics over the age of 55, just 25% go to confession. So that's 1 out of 4 rather than 6 out of 10. Isn't that interesting? When we're looking at this, I really have to ask the question, why the difference? Perhaps it is that in the face of the current culture that we live in, the fact that someone even chooses to practice their faith actually tells us that if they're choosing to practice it or identify as a Catholic, they're actually trying to live it out. This is what stands out to me in a culture of so-called nuns, those N-O-N-E-S, who supposedly don't identify with any religion. It's the largest growing category if we were to look at categories in relation to religion. So in reality, the fact that young people are identifying at all as Catholic speaks something to what we see in this study. If they're practicing at all, they're more likely to subscribe to what the church teaches and to actually identify with their Catholic faith. So that same age group, age 18 to 34, 1 out of 4 of them said that they believe everything the church teaches. So we're talking about things even relating to moral issues and impacting how these young Catholic voters will vote. Now, if we look at that in contrast to whether or not those age 55 and up believe everything the church teaches, just 16% say they do. So we're looking at almost a 10% gap in terms of how much people, practicing Catholics, believe all the church teaches. Again, 25% of practicing Catholics and that 18 to 34 year range show more promise in subscribing to all the church teaches. I think that we've seen years of essentially this attitude with regard to, well, I can identify as Catholic, but I can live my life how I wish. And unfortunately, that's something that's more common among older Catholics. We could put it back to catechesis. Some, maybe that's you, you're saying, well, I think it has more to do with life experience. And at the same time, that could be a moment of pride as well. At the same time, we could say that perhaps these young Catholics don't actually know their faith. They're like, oh yeah, I believe everything the Catholic Church teaches, assuming they know what indeed the Church does teach. But again, I kind of am throwing out the fact that they claim they believe everything the Church teaches, and I'm focusing on the fact that they are choosing to go to confession more often than any other age group. Why? I think young Catholics age 18 to 34 are facing this culture, and they recognize, if I'm going to be Catholic, if I'm going to survive, if I'm going to choose to develop my character, my faith, and to truly thrive, I need to have hope in God. I need to be honest with myself in a very morally confused culture, and I hunger for more than what the world's constant yes and affirmation of any type of lifestyle says. I think these 3 H's are really important. They have hope coming from their faith. They have honesty with themselves. And this is part of the reason why they're going to confession, because they're going, I'm screwing up. I am literally barely treading water. I'm at times drowning in this culture, and I'm hungry I want more. This is why I often point to St. John Paul II's visit to Poland for the first time after becoming Pope. People said that the young people, no one would show up for the leader of the Catholic Church. Yet people showed up in droves. In fact, over 1 million. And they chanted in the streets. They couldn't be silenced. We want God. And this is what I see in the fact that more young Catholics who are actually choosing to be Catholic are going to confession. They want more. They need God. They have hope in Him, and they're having to really face the reality of the mistakes they themselves may have already made and are making. And in fact, I'll share with you the story later on this week on Trending, where my guest shares her own experience of her struggle with sexuality for years. How she herself struggled with homosexuality. And sometimes I think we kind of try to undercomplicate it and say, well, someone's either just attracted to girls or just attracted to boys. But we forget that often when sexuality steps out of its proper context, people tend to swing both ways. I shared with you before, many of my friends from high school swung both ways to this day now. It wasn't the case when they were younger, now it is. When we confuse the purpose of sexuality, the creation of new human life, we start to cry out and go, well, what's real? And this is what I think these young Catholics are saying. I want to know what's real. I'm struggling to know what's true. And I'm choosing to try and hope in God and have that hunger and keep it alive in me by going to confession. And so let these numbers inspire you and have hope that those who are choosing to practice their Catholic faith, they want it. And we need to step up and continue to direct them with the proper examples, love, and resources necessary, which is why I ask you all the time, join me in my mission of trending here. This show, we are focusing on bringing up the toughest moral issues in our culture because we want you to understand and see that we have to go out into the deep where people are at and answer those tough questions that make us uncomfortable. Go into those murky waters where people are truly losing themselves out of a false sense of compassion.